Yeah, this is the Book Judge. This is his show with you. He knows when books are bad.
So it turns out that Fyodor Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground turned out to be an epic fail. Honestly, if you ask me, the book should have stayed exactly there, underground, so I wouldn't have had to read it. For a more interesting read, try Maniacal by Asher Warren.
Serious book guy. This is what his song is.
And remember, folks, I'm the critic, and I always
books
win.
are bad.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Book Court, hosted by yours truly, Melvin Wirtz, aka the Book Judge. Because even though we don't judge a book by its cover, someone still has to judge the book. Today we're reviewing a very interesting piece of literature. Medley of the Rainstorm, a 40,000 word, 19-chapter Risk of Rain 2 fanfiction by YouTuber and composer Apollo Music. 40,000 words means it's longer than supposed literary masterpiece Notes from Underground. You know my thoughts on that book. Up to. And almost twice the length of Maniacal by our beloved Asher Warren, a favorite on this channel in terms of authors. 40,000 words for a fanfiction. You know, back in my day, fanfictions weren't taken as seriously. They were mostly just racy, risque, self-insert, shipping fanfictions. Like when Lara Croft was the #1 video game babe. Yeah, those were the days, I tell you. Risk of Rain 2 was not something I was really familiar with. So my niece, who's an avid gamer, she got me into it. We started playing. I had to learn the ropes from her. She's much better than I am. And I found it to be a very interesting and fun game. It's a sort of science fiction, sci-fi game with a lot of characters and baddies, bosses, enemies, items, loot, lore. What else could you really ask for? A lot of difficulty, I might say. And it is what they call a roguelike, which is where every single run or playthrough, every time you die and start a new game, the items will be different, spawn different locations you'll go to, and so it gives a fresh experience each time. Think of it as a certain Scott Bakula show from the 1900s, if you not that any kids would remember. I found Medley of the Rainstorm to be a very good piece of writing, especially from someone who's basically just starting out in terms of serious writing and long-form fiction. Even though it's a fan fiction, don't let that mar your opinion of it. Medley of the Rainstorm is a serious piece of literature. Throughout Medley of the Rainstorm, each chapter is named after a track of the Risk of Rain 2 soundtrack, which is very interesting. And the soundtrack in Risk of Rain 2 is very good. I've listened to it on the side, and it's pretty good for video game music. Throughout Medley of the Rainstorm, we follow the crew of the UES Safe Travels as they go to the planet of Petrichor 5 to answer a distress call and just to recover any remnants of the crew that might still be alive down there of the ship that asked for the rescue. And when they go to Petrichor 5, it's your classic forbidden planet trope that we either love or hate in fiction. I find it to be very appealing. You know, it's kind of a fear of the unknown, big bads, monsters, leads to a lot of big freak out content, and I love it. You know, there are some pretty cool enemies and monsters in this book. The characters, I'll just jump straight into the review, I guess. The characters are very strong. I didn't expect that much because, you know, when I was playing Risk of Rain with my niece, I didn't really encounter that much characterization. Mainly because, you know, it's hard to get that characterization from, you know, a sort of like arcade style, you know, action-y kind of game. There aren't really any cutscenes spare for the opening kind of cutscene of the game. And besides that, there's only really these logbooks you can pick up. And you have to really go out of your way for some of them. So I was pleasantly surprised. It's a very character-driven story, Medley of the Rainstorm. All the characters, you know, are fun. They're very interesting in terms of concept. The only problem I had with the characters is some weren't fleshed out as much as I wanted them to be. You know, so that's our first offense in this trial of Medley of the Rainstorm. Some characters that were very strong were Captain, who's, you know, the captain. They all use code names, of course. Because it's sort of a Reservoir Dogs style story, where it's a crew of people that aren't really familiar with each other. Some of them butt heads, don't really work well together, and they have to pull off this grand mission. You know, I like that. Instead of a heist, it's a rescue mission. It adds a lot of humanity to it, rather than we're following bad people doing bad things, because a lot of the people in the story of Medley of the Rainstorm are actually quite good and quite heroic. And none of them are the typical action characters. I'd say they're all pretty interesting, except for Rex, the living plant organism thing, Multi, the friendly robot, and Loader, who is a female character with a big grappling arm. And besides that, all the characters are strong. Captain, yes, Captain. Railgunner, Mercenary, Engineer. Mercenary and Engineer. You got Mercenary, who is a noble, honorable samurai type character. And Engineer, who is a techie guy. Who's, you know, really wanting to learn more about the planet and the beings that used to inhabit it. Or still do, you know. Forbidden Planet narrative, of course. So there's going to be some natives of the planet they're going to have to face throughout the story. I found their relationship to be very interesting when they butt heads, and their partnership, you know, when they start to work together, turned out to be a very compelling, you know, side story. The relationship between Captain and Railgunner, sort of mentor, student kind of thing, where they're friends, and they're also, they have a lot to teach each other. You know, Captain is this sort of, you know, he kind of likes to have fun, but he's still very serious, and he loves his, and values his crewmates. And he turned out to be a very sympathetic character. And Railgunner is sort of, you know, loyal and kind of by the books, and tries to, you know, steer Captain back on track when he, you know, gets off track, because he's a very out of the box kind of guy. Commando is this older, kind of retired soldier type of character. He's very cool, mind you. Reminds me of a cowboy type of thing, man with no name, Clint Eastwood, kind of like get things done type of attitude, but he's very sympathetic as well. Huntress is sort of badass femme fatale, which I always love some of those. Some of my favorite characters are, the badass femme fatales. As I mentioned Lara Croft earlier, the pacing is a little quick. It's a little bit quick, but it's made up for by the structure. The chapters are quite short in the beginning, in the first half. It's split into 2 acts. In the first half, it's pretty short. Excuse me. Yes, just the camera. First act is pretty short chapters, and the second act, we start getting longer chapters. As the crew starts to be there longer, and they're contemplating, how long will we be here? Is this distress signal legit? They're starting to unravel, and they're learning more about themselves and who they are and who each other are. So the chapters are getting longer, more personal, which I thought to be very, very good. Very good and subtle. Something you can pretty much only do in a book because the chapters have that segmentation. And I really appreciate that. I thought it was quite good. Very, very strong and professional for a kind of a newbie to long-form fiction. Some complaints I had, minor complaints. There's a couple, points where there's a little bit of over-explaining. Like, there's a scene where most of the crew is playing a game of cards. And the author explains the entire game of cards, which I get, because the card game has a lot of characterization back and forth and gives Huntress a lot of characterization, and that scene made me from going on Huntress to being a big fan of her. But yes, the actual game is explained in too much detail. I don't need to know what Texas Hold'em is. I know what Texas Hold'em is. And the actual gameplay, it doesn't really matter that much. You can just say, oh, this person's winning, this person's winning. But of course in a more, intelligent way, I guess. But yes, you do not have to explain Texas Hold'em. But, Apollo Music is still a very talented author. The way they implement a lot of the items and wink at a few references to the game, where even a newcomer to Risk of Rain like myself was able to be like, catch a subtle reference and be like, oh, yes, I remember that item from the game, even if it's not explicitly named. And that's a good thing. Not all the items that they find in the book are explicitly named. So it's not like a big wink to people who know of Risk of Rain. You can tell Apollo Music knows what they're doing. So, spoiler corner. But first,
Ho 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 ho.
do you hear that?
Ho 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 ho.
Uh-oh. This guy again. Every now and then, I find myself perplexed that he still keeps coming around here. But we'll put up with him this time. It's time for a mole message.
Oh, come on, Your Honor. Don't act like you don't like me.
What do you have to say? I'm in the middle of a review, can't you see?
Oh, come on, you bastard. You know the people love me.
Yeah, you love attention, don't you?
Did you know that Apollo Music has ties with the composer of Risk of Rain, Chris Christodoulou?
I didn't know that. Can you tell me a little bit more about Apollo Music's relationship with Risk of Rain and the composer, Chris Christodoulou?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Your Honor. Apollo Music has made fan music for Risk of Rain and has been noticed by Hopu Games and Chris Christodoulou himself. Christodoulou has also sent Apollo Music signed vinyls, and Chris Christodoulou had an affair with Apollo Music's mom.
Wow. Yeah, thanks, Mo. That's actually quite helpful. I did not know that myself. Where'd you get this info?
My friend Chelsea Manning.
Okay, buddy. I think we're done with you.
Wait, I know who Q is!
Well, you heard it from the mole. Apollo Music is more than just a simple fan of Risk of Rain 2. It's very personal to them. And that's what I like to hear. And now we'll briefly go into the spoiler corner and reconvene. Take this as a brief recess for the people that don't want spoilers. And we'll reconvene at this timestamp. So you can skip to this and I'll give my final thoughts. But now, jury that remains, time for the spoiler corner. Woo, 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 woo. Order in the court. Major character death. That's what I like to see. I love when an author doesn't fear killing off characters. But in Medley of the Rainstorm, it's always a very necessary death. It feels very intentional. It doesn't feel like, ooh, how can I shock the readers in this chapter by killing off which character? No. Apollo Music is very skilled at what they do. Multi's death is very shocking, and even though I would have liked some more characterization from Multi, it's a very cool gag death to introduce Bandit, who's a very good and well-developed character, mind you. He's a sort of anti-hero and has a sort of arc throughout the book and becomes more and more, of an anti-hero and less of a, silly, kind of funny bandit kind of guy. He's kind of like Batman or Rorschach in that way, or, an anti-hero, a hero that does bad things, but in their heart, they're still on the side of good. They're not going to the dark side. Star Wars. They're not going to the dark side because they are a good person. And Bandit is a good person. His relationship with Loader is very underdeveloped and shallow. And by extent, it makes Loader a very underdeveloped character. Her death was very powerful because it led to Bandit sort of, breaking and, becoming enraged and ending up killing Commando. And that was huge to me. Because I like Commando, and Commando's death, it shocked me. And it felt like it was a real big turning point for Bandit. And as we see at the end of the book, Commando is resurrected, revived by this void. And I'm very interested to see where it'll take us. Because there is going to be a part 2. And Apollo Music said it's going to be even longer. Well, we're only halfway through, so I assume the second part is going to be longer, hopefully. Maybe 50,000, 60,000 words? A critic can dream, right? My biggest issue with the book is Mithrix, the final boss of Risk of Rain 2, and the final boss of Medley of the Rainstorm. There is not enough development gone into Mithrix, not enough explanation. I believe there should have been some, build-up, some logbook entries, some stuff Engineer was looking at, which Engineer Mercenaries' death's very honorable, very sad. But there should have been some more build-up to Mithrix. There was more build-up to Alessio, who is, the source of, the fake distress call that brings the UES safe travels to Petrichor 5. And I really wish there was a lot more development there. Alessio got more development than Mithrix. And Mithrix is this gigantic, awesome moon god king thing. And he's awesome in the games. And he's a very tough fight. But in the book, it's kind of lasts for half a chapter. And I really would have liked a chapter or two more dedicated to Mithrix. Anyways. Spoiler corner done. Yes, jury, come back in. Your fellow jury members are here. And let's give my final thoughts. Medley of the Rainstorm is a very competent book, with some flaws here and there, but the sum of its parts is a fantastic fan fiction taking place in a very rich universe that I hope is cultivated and flourishes even more, both by fans of Medley of the Rainstorm and by Apollo Music themselves, hopefully one day. I'm very excited to see the future of Apollo Music's writing, and I was a big fan of Medley of the Rainstorm. I, the book judge, find Medley of the Rainstorm by Apollo Music to be guilty of being a damn good read. Let me adjust this a little bit for our little ending gag. And remember, folks, I'm the critic, and I always win.